So I was asked personally, what would I like to see happen in the Middle East? And for me, I'm Egyptian American as well as African American, and I'd like to see self-governance, I guess, of the different nations. So people in control of their own destinies, living with with dignity, and also without having to deal with so much corruption. So being able to live the way they want to, so deciding whether or not they want, what kind of rights and responsibilities, coming together to form their own constitutions, and deciding how they want to go forward into the future. Okay, I'm someone who's in my mid-20s, I won't say how old, but a lot of the uprisings have been spurred by people my age who have been sort of hesitant about their future because of lack of jobs, lots of education. So they're smart people who don't really know what to do, and they're taking their own futures into their hands. So what I'd like to see is the fruition of that. More jobs, less corruption, and independent governance, and having the people control their future rather than authoritarian regimes who are stagnating the population and a new future.
And in terms of the role that the rest of the world has to play, what do you think the rest of the world
My answer
should
might
do?
be a little bit controversial to some, but what I think is the world doesn't really have a role to play. These are uprisings that have been started within the countries, and I think the people inside of the countries have to just, work on the nitty-gritty details of their constitutions, of their how they want to rule, how they want to cooperate with each other and work together. I don't really see how an outside force coming in to try to control that process would be beneficial, and whether or not it would be actually helpful to the situation. Maybe some ways the outside world could help is to work on their own democracies and be like a shining example. One example that I can think of is what happened in Wisconsin. I think the North African uprisings was a direct correlation to how the people were inspired to go out into the streets and protest for their rights, although it didn't have a positive result, but the spirit was there. So I think we need to work on our own stuff, and then people can see what's going on. But I don't think intervention is the answer, especially at this stage where people are actually working on the nitty-gritty details and trying to figure out what is it that I want as a society. Let them work on that, and then we can come in and maybe give sort of just insight. But that's what I think.
So, and again, what are your hopes, maybe? Your hopes, your fears, your concerns about the situation and what's going on in the Middle East, but especially going forward? Because we've done what we've done in the past.
My concern is that these uprisings were started by young, educated people, and hopefully they will not be stunted, because to build nations is not something that's easy. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, politics going on, and hopefully the progress isn't stunted or thrown backwards. So I just hope that there's enough force to go forward in terms of democracy building, governance, getting real reforms in these nations. Some of my hopes, I hope to see a new Middle East. Maybe with these toppling of these oligarchic regimes, they can have new types of economies, new, maybe the Middle East will be the new energy generation, get away from oil, start maybe solar power or something like that. So I'd like to see the future looking at different types of ways that people can go forward. That's what I would love to see happen. So going forward in a new direction and trying to make progress, innovations. That's what I'd like to see. What was the last part?
Something kind of related to those themes or topics is maybe the role of religion. Obviously, it's majority. Well, Middle East is majority Muslim. But what do you say about the role of religion, either in politics or in civil society or elsewhere?
Okay. Well, I think this is an area of the world where religion is important, and I think the people have religious backgrounds, whether Christianity or Islam, and the uprisings in general have been across the board. So I don't think that one religion or another is going to be the focus, but nation building, people coming together, having their solidarity, like in identity, to go forward in nation building or nation reform, I should say, not building. I don't see that the movements were religious. I saw there were more, everyone in the different areas of the population were informed or were going forward in this. So I think religion plays an important role, but I don't see that these movements were religiously driven. Okay, is that too confusing? Sorry. Oh, sorry.
And so, but before this, when you were answering the first question, you had said that the West perhaps doesn't or shouldn't play a role
Well,
in any of
I mean, the reason I say that is, I don't want to call it hypocrisy, but say self-interest. The way that the Western world or even any other country works is whatever action that we're going to take, either within our own borders or without, is the purpose is to deal with our own self-interest. What's best for, if you're talking about America, what's best for America? For example, like in Libya, for example, there is interest in having a different regime, but in a nation like Bahrain, where we're allies, even though there's authoritarian crackdown on the protests, you don't hear much. So I'm just worried that the Western intervention would just be one-sided, and these nations need to make real reforms that are best for the people and not necessarily outside interests. So that's why I say that. But I could be wrong.
Anything else in terms of, I guess, a few other things that pop into my mind as relates, to these recent uprisings. What role, you had mentioned that the youth had a huge, take or I guess role in these, I guess, uprisings, in the revolutions. But also, perhaps maybe if you can speak to the role of women or technology or any other thoughts that come to mind related to this, and why now even, and why is it so significant?
So I'll talk to each of your points. For when you're talking about women in the revolution, I don't think it's surprising. I mean, the women that I know from these countries, for example, Egypt, it's very matriarchal society. Women play a strong role. They're not the submissive type of people. So they were right there on the lines, helping with food and protesting, shouting, carrying signs that we saw on CNN or Al Jazeera or whatever. You saw the women were out there just as much, even in Libya as well. I was just watching a report. So I don't find it surprising that women were playing a large role, because they have just as much to lose as the men, or just as much to gain. So they're fighting for what they believe in, their rights, and what they hope their countries will look like in the future. So there's a strong urgency, a strong sense of injustice, and we have to correct it right now. And I don't think it has to do with race or sex or religion. It's the whole nation that has all the issues that it has to deal with, and that's what's pushing it forward. In terms of why now, to tell you the truth, I don't think it's why now. I think this has been building. My father's generation, I think, would have wanted Mubarak out, but they didn't have the will, or maybe it wasn't bad enough back then. People respected him, but they think he stayed maybe 20 years too late, or 10, 20 years too late. So I think it's not a matter of, it just came out of nowhere. There were elections that were totally corrupt, and people were just fed up with it. There have been just building and building and building, and then there's just one spark in Tunisia. And then when people saw what the possibility was, then it spread. Because we see by example. People would think, it's impossible, it's impossible. But when you see that spark, that glimmer of hope, that would just drove people straight forward. But I don't think it came out of nowhere. I think it was just building up, building up, building up. You have a big gas tank, one spark, and then the whole thing explodes, and I think that's what happened. Technology. Facebook, Twitter, I think these are amazing technologies that have been used actually for a while. Like, for example, in Palestine, the journalists would use Twitter to keep in contact with each other. So if they have to go across the border, they would know, what happened. Did you disappear or not? So I think the technology with cell phones has been used in this region for a long time. But it's the organization that has been using the technology that has maybe brought it to a new level. I think this is the first time ever an internet has been shut down in a nation. So you have new technologies and you have new counter technologies, but I think there's no way to hold in information, especially nowadays with all these different types of communication websites and techniques. So I think that you can't hold back knowledge, and we saw that.
Any other last comments, thoughts on this whole subject matter?
I'm really excited to see what's going to go on in the next 5, 10, 20 years. I know right now everyone's excited about all the uprisings. This dictator got out, this authoritarian regime was toppled. But it's going to be the next few years, the elections, the constitutional reforms that are really going to solidify whether or not these reforms will be long-lasting or just a burst of energy that just dissipated. So I look forward to seeing the elections, the constitutional changes, and the play with democracy. Because I mean, the American democracy is an experiment just as any other kind of form. So maybe the new kinds of democracy that the Middle Eastern nations are going to be forming is something the rest of us can learn from, because no one's perfect. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen.
Very nice. Thank you very much for your time. And that's all my questions.
Okay,
That's all I have today.